Ciudad Juárez. El Paraíso no ve mal alguno. En Dios Confiamos, written by Jason Stewart, and read for you by Benjamin. Chapter 1. Arrival. The bus pulled into Ciudad Juárez on a Tuesday afternoon, and Marco watched the city materialize through dust-streaked windows. Amber light turned everything soft, the sprawl of low buildings, the mountains rising in the distance, the vendors selling fruit from carts along the terminal approach. He had 2 suitcases, 3,000 pesos, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from running toward something you can't name. The station smelled of diesel and industrial cleaning solution. Marco stepped onto the platform and felt the desert heat wrap around him like a blanket he hadn't asked for. This was supposed to be paradise. Not the word he would have used in Mexico City when he quit his job at the advertising firm, when he told Gabriela he couldn't do this anymore, when he packed his life into 2 bags and bought a ticket north. But paradise was what he'd been seeking, some version of it. Peace, solitude, a place where he could breathe without the weight of expectations pressing down on his chest. In the city, he'd spent 5 years designing campaigns for products he didn't believe in, attending meetings that stretched like taffy, coming home to an apartment that felt like a waiting room. Gabriela had wanted marriage, children, a house in the suburbs. All reasonable things. All things that made Marco feel like he was drowning. When he tried to explain, she looked at him like he was speaking another language. "What do you want, then?" she'd asked. He didn't have an answer, so he'd come here, to the border, to a city he'd only read about in news articles that focused on violence and corruption, never on the people who lived ordinary lives between the headlines. He'd imagined simplicity, a small room, a quiet routine, work that didn't demand his soul. He'd imagined disappearing into anonymity, becoming no one in particular, letting the noise in his head finally settle. The terminal was crowded with people moving in purposeful directions. Families reuniting, workers heading home, travelers like him carrying their lives in luggage. Marco stood still, letting the current flow around him. He needed to find the hostel Rosa's cousin had mentioned, a place near the station that rented rooms by the week. He pulled out the address written on a scrap of paper, already softened by the sweat of his palm. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marco picked up his suitcases and started walking toward the exit. The city stretched before him, unfamiliar and indifferent. Somewhere in this sprawl was the peace he'd been seeking. Somewhere in these streets was the answer to the question he couldn't articulate. He didn't know yet that he was asking the wrong question. That paradise wasn't a place you escaped to, but something built between people who chose to show up for each other. That peace wasn't the absence of noise, but the presence of belonging. For now, he was just a man with 2 suitcases, standing in amber light, hoping the city would be kind enough to let him disappear. Chapter 2. Rosa. She nearly knocked him over. Marco was standing near the cafe inside the terminal, studying his phone's map, when a woman in her 60s carrying 2 bags of groceries collided with his shoulder. Oranges tumbled across the tile floor. They both bent to retrieve them, hands reaching for the same fruit. Lo siento, she said, laughing. I wasn't watching where I was going. No, it was my fault, Marco said, gathering oranges into her bag. I was blocking the walkway. She studied him with dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything: his expensive luggage, his clean shoes, the way he held himself like someone trying to take up less space. "You just arrived," she said. Not a question. "Is it that obvious?" "You have that look, like you're not sure if you're supposed to be here." She smiled, and it transformed her face into something warm and maternal. "I'm Rosa. I work at the cafe here. You look lost." "Marco." He extended his hand, and she shook it firmly. "I'm looking for a hostel. Near here, supposedly." "The blue one? 3 blocks that way?" She pointed with her chin, bags still in her hands. "I know the owner. Juan. Good man. Honest prices." "That's the one." Rosa looked at him for a long moment, some calculation happening behind her eyes. Then she made a decision. "Come on. I'll walk you there. My shift just ended, and I'm heading that direction anyway." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm offering." She started walking, and Marco had no choice but to follow, pulling his suitcases behind him. They walked through streets that smelled of grilled meat and car exhaust. Rosa pointed out landmarks: the pharmacy that stayed open late, the taqueria with the best al pastor, the corner where the bus stopped if he needed to go downtown. She asked questions without being intrusive: where he was from, what brought him to Juarez, how long he planned to stay. "I'm not sure yet," Marco admitted. "I just needed to leave Mexico City." "Running from something or toward something?" "I thought I was running toward peace. Now I'm not sure there's a difference." Rosa laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Peace isn't a place, mijo. It's a practice. But Juarez can be good for people who need to figure things out. The city doesn't judge. It just is." They turned onto a quieter street lined with jacaranda trees. The hostel appeared, a faded blue building with iron bars on the windows and a hand-painted sign. Rosa pushed open the door without knocking, calling out, "Juan, I brought you a customer." A man in his 40s emerged from a back room, weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Rosa. "You're always bringing me strays." "This is Marco. He needs a room. Be nice to him." Juan looked Marco over with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of traveler. "How long?" "A week to start," Marco said. "Maybe longer. I have a single on the 2nd floor. Clean sheets, shared bathroom. Breakfast is communal if you want it, but optional. 200 pesos a night or 1,200 for the week." Marco nodded. It was more than fair. Rosa touched his arm gently. "You'll be okay here. Juan takes care of his guests. And if you need anything, I'm at the cafe most mornings. Come by for coffee. On the house, first one." "Thank you," Marco said, and meant it more than she could know. She smiled at him, like she understood anyway. "Welcome to Juarez, Marco. The city has a way of giving you what you need, even if it's not what you thought you wanted." Then she was gone, leaving him standing in the hostel lobby with Juan, who was already pulling keys from a drawer. Marco felt something shift in his chest, the first small crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Chapter 3. The hostel. The room was exactly what Marco needed: sparse, clean, anonymous. A single bed with white sheets, a wooden chair, a small table beneath a window that looked out onto the street. The walls were painted pale yellow, and someone had hung a simple cross above the bed. The shared bathroom was down the hall, and Juan had pointed out the kitchen where guests could make coffee in the mornings. "Breakfast is at 8 if you want it," Juan said, handing Marco the key. "Nothing fancy. Eggs, beans, tortillas. Some of the long-term guests cook together. You're welcome to join or not. No pressure." Marco thanked him and closed the door. He set his suitcases on the floor and sat on the bed, feeling the mattress give slightly beneath his weight. Through the window, he could hear the city settling into evening, distant music, voices calling to each other, the rumble of traffic on the main avenue. This was it. This was the peace he'd been seeking. A room with a door that locked, a bed that was his alone, silence that belonged to no one. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt hollow. He unpacked slowly, hanging shirts in the narrow closet, stacking books on the table. Everything he owned fit easily into the small space. 5 years in Mexico City, and this was all he had to show for it. Gabriela had kept the apartment, the furniture, the life they'd built together. He'd taken only what was his, and it turned out that wasn't much. Night fell quickly. Marco lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the hostel coming alive around him. Footsteps in the hallway. A door closing. Laughter from somewhere below. The building held other lives, other stories, other people between one place and another. He must have slept because he woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. His phone said 7:45. He dressed and made his way to the kitchen, following the voices. 4 people sat around a large wooden table. A couple in their 30s speaking rapid Spanish with Argentine accents, a young woman with a camera bag at her feet, and an older man reading a newspaper. Juan was at the stove, scrambling eggs in a large pan. "Marco," Juan said without turning around. "Coffee's on the counter. Grab a cup and sit." Marco poured coffee into a chipped mug and took a seat at the end of the table. The Argentine couple nodded at him. The young woman smiled. The older man kept reading. "This is Marco," Juan announced, sliding eggs onto plates. "Just arrived yesterday. Marco, this is everyone. They'll introduce themselves if they feel like it." The woman with the camera extended her hand. "Elena, I'm here shooting a story for a magazine. You?" "Just staying for a while." "Running from something or toward something?" she asked, and Marco felt a strange echo of Rosa's question. Still figuring that out, she nodded like this was a perfectly reasonable answer. The Argentine couple introduced themselves as Martín and Claudia, traveling north before crossing into the States. The older man was Paulo, a Brazilian who worked remotely in tech and had been at the hostel for 3 months. They ate together, conversation flowing easily around topics that required nothing from Marco: the weather, the best places to eat nearby, whether the water was safe to drink. He listened more than he spoke, feeling the strange comfort of being among people who expected nothing from him. After breakfast, Elena caught him in the hallway. "You can't stay in the hostel neighborhood forever," she said. "Let me show you the real city. I'm shooting in the market tomorrow. Come with me." Marco wanted to say no. He'd come here to be alone, to find peace in solitude. But something in Elena's directness, in the way she assumed he'd say yes, made him nod. "Good," she said. "Meet me here at 9. That night, lying in bed, Marco realized he hadn't thought about Mexico City all day. Hadn't thought about Gabriela or the job he'd quit or the life he'd left behind. For the first time in months, he'd simply existed in the present moment, among strangers who were becoming something else. Chapter 4. Elena's City. Elena moved through Juarez like water finding its path, fluid, purposeful, impossible to redirect. She showed up at the hostel at 9 sharp, camera bag slung over her shoulder, wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt that said Prensa across the back. "Ready?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. They took a bus downtown, Elena pointing out landmarks through the window. "That's where the old cinema used to be before it burned down. That corner is where the best tamales in the city are sold, but only on Saturdays. That building with the blue door is where my friend Sophia runs a bookstore." The market sprawled across several blocks, a maze of stalls selling everything from fresh produce to bootleg DVDs. The air smelled of cilantro and diesel, ripe fruit and frying oil. Elena wove through the crowds with practiced ease, stopping occasionally to photograph a vendor arranging mangoes, an old woman selling herbs, children playing between the stalls. "What's the story?" Marco asked. "Women who run businesses in the informal economy, how they support their families, navigate corruption, build community." She paused to photograph a woman selling handmade tortillas, steam rising from her comal. "The news only covers Juarez when there's violence. But this is the real story. People showing up every day, taking care of each other, building lives despite everything." A vendor called out to Elena by name, waving her over. They spoke in rapid Spanish, the woman gesturing animatedly while Elena laughed. She bought a bag of oranges and handed half to Marco. "Doña Carmen," Elena explained as they walked away. "She's been here 30 years, knows everyone. When her daughter got sick last year, the other vendors took turns running her stall so she wouldn't lose her spot." They spent the morning in the market, Elena shooting and talking to vendors who clearly knew her well. Marco watched her work, the way she asked permission before photographing, how she listened more than she spoke, the respect she showed to everyone she encountered. Around noon, Elena led him to a community center where a women's boxing class was in session. Young women in gloves and headgear sparred in a ring while a coach called out instructions. Elena photographed them with obvious admiration. "This program is free," she said. "Run by volunteers. Gives girls a safe place to be after school, teaches them discipline and confidence. The coach is a former boxer who could have gone pro but stayed here to teach." One of the boxers, a girl no more than 16, waved at Elena between rounds. Elena waved back, grinning. They ate lunch at a small restaurant where the owner, Dolores, embraced Elena like family and insisted on feeding them both. The food came in generous portions: carne asada, beans, rice, fresh tortillas, salsa that made Marco's eyes water. "You see?" Elena said, gesturing around the restaurant. "This is Juarez. Not the violence, not the corruption. This. People who care about each other. People who show up." Marco looked around the restaurant. Families eating together, workers on lunch breaks, old men playing dominoes in the corner. Ordinary life, unremarkable and profound. "Why did you come here?" Elena asked suddenly. To Juarez, I mean. Marco considered lying, offering some simple explanation. But Elena's directness demanded honesty. I was looking for peace. I thought if I could just get away from everything, find somewhere quiet, I could figure out who I was supposed to be. And? And I'm starting to think peace isn't what I thought it was. Elena smiled. Peace isn't the absence of noise, Marco. It's knowing you're not alone in the noise. They spent the afternoon walking through neighborhoods Elena wanted to photograph, murals painted on walls, community gardens tended by volunteers, a small library run out of someone's living room. Everywhere they went, people knew Elena. They called out greetings, asked about her work, invited her to come back soon. As the sun began to set, painting the city in shades of gold and amber, Elena turned to Marco. You can't hide here. Juarez won't let you. The city demands that you show up, that you be present. But if you do, if you let yourself be part of it, you'll find something better than peace. What's that? Belonging. They took the bus back to the hostel in comfortable silence. Marco looked out the window at the city passing by. This place he'd come to as a stranger, seeking solitude. Elena was right. Juarez wouldn't let him hide. The city was already pulling him in, making demands, offering something he hadn't known he needed. Chapter 5. Sickness and Care. The flu hit Marco on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after his arrival. He woke with a fever that made his skin feel too tight, his throat raw, his body aching in places he didn't know could ache. He managed to text Juan that he wouldn't be coming down for breakfast, then collapsed back into bed. For 3 days, he barely moved. The room became a fever dream. Shadows lengthening and shrinking, sounds from the street filtering through like they were underwater, time losing all meaning. He slept in fragments, waking to drink water from the bottle by his bed, then falling back into restless unconsciousness. On the 3rd day, he woke to knocking, soft at first, then more insistent. Marco? Mijo, are you in there? Rosa's voice. He tried to answer, but his throat wouldn't cooperate. The door opened. Juan must have given her a key, and Rosa appeared, carrying bags that smelled of something warm and herbal. Ay, Dios mío, she said, taking in his state. You look terrible. Thanks. Marco managed to croak. She set the bags on the table and came to feel his forehead with the back of her hand. You're burning up. When did you last eat? He couldn't remember. Rosa made a sound of disapproval and went to work. She opened the window to let in fresh air, changed the water in his bottle, pulled out containers from her bags. Soup, chicken and vegetables in a rich broth, fresh ginger tea, medicine from the pharmacy, oranges already peeled and sectioned. I noticed you hadn't been to the cafe, she said, helping him sit up. Juan said you'd been in your room for days. You can't just hide when you're sick, mijo. People worry. I didn't want to bother anyone. Bother? She looked at him like he'd said something absurd. Taking care of each other isn't a bother. It's what we do. She fed him soup, small spoonfuls that he managed to keep down. The warmth spread through his chest, easing the ache. She made him drink the ginger tea, bitter and strong, then gave him medicine and made him promise to take more in 4 hours. "I'm going to sit here until you fall asleep," she announced, settling into the chair by the window. "Then I'll come back tomorrow to check on you." "You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to." She pulled out knitting from her bag, needles clicking softly. "My son lives in El Paso now. Married, 2 kids. I don't get to take care of people as much as I used to. Let me do this." Marco felt something crack open in his chest. Not painful, but profound. When was the last time someone had taken care of him like this? Not because they had to, not because they were obligated, but simply because they chose to show up? "Why?" he asked. "Why do you care?" Rosa looked up from her knitting, eyes soft. "Because you're here. Because you're alone. Because I can." She paused, considering. "When my husband had his accident 5 years ago, he drives trucks, fell asleep at the wheel. I thought we were going to lose everything. The medical bills, the time off work, the fear. But people showed up. Neighbors brought food. Friends sat with me at the hospital. The cafe owner told me to take all the time I needed, kept paying me anyway. We survived because people chose to care." "I'm sorry," Marco said. "About your husband. He's fine now, fully recovered. But I learned something during that time. Paradise isn't a place where nothing bad happens. It's a place where people show up for each other when bad things do happen, where you don't have to face the darkness alone." She went back to her knitting, and Marco closed his eyes, feeling the medicine start to work. The last thing he heard before sleep took him was the soft click of her needles, the sound of someone choosing to stay. When he woke the next morning, she was gone. But there was fresh soup in the small refrigerator Juan must have brought up, more medicine on the table, and a note. "Eat, rest. Come see me when you're better. Rosa." Marco lay in bed, staring at the note, understanding for the first time what Elena had meant. Peace wasn't solitude. It was this: knowing someone would show up with soup, that you mattered enough for someone to choose to care. Chapter 6. Finding Ground. Recovery came slowly. By the end of the week, Marco was well enough to venture downstairs for breakfast. The regulars greeted him with the casual warmth of people who'd noticed his absence. Paolo asked if he was feeling better. Martine and Claudia had left a get well card. Elena told him he looked like death warmed over, but in an improved way. He walked to Rosa's cafe that afternoon. She saw him coming much. "Thank you for everything." She waved away his gratitude. "You're going to need work soon, yes? Can't live on savings forever." "I've been looking, but my friend's daughter runs a small advertising agency downtown. They need a designer. I told her about you." She slid a piece of paper across the counter with a name and address. "Go see her Monday. Tell her Rosa sent you." Marco stared at the paper. "You didn't have to." "Stop saying that." "I wanted to." She smiled. "Besides, you're good for business. You drink a lot of coffee." The interview on Monday was brief. Alejandra, the agency owner, looked at his portfolio and hired him on the spot. "Rosa vouches for you, and that's enough for me. When can you start?" "Tomorrow?" "Perfect." The work was simple: designing ads for local businesses, creating social media graphics, occasional website layouts. Nothing glamorous, but honest work that paid enough to cover rent and food. Marco found a rhythm: mornings at the agency, afternoons exploring the city, evenings back at the hostel. Within 2 weeks, he realized he'd outgrown the hostel. Juan helped him find a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, 1 bedroom, furnished with mismatched furniture from the street market, but clean and his own. Elena helped him move his few belongings, along with Paulo and a guy from the agency named Miguel, who Marco had started eating lunch with. The apartment felt like the first real place he'd had in years. Not temporary, not borrowed, not shared with someone who wanted different things. His. He bought plants from a vendor Rosa recommended, hung prints from a local artist Elena introduced him to, filled the small bookshelf with novels from Sophia's bookstore. The city began to know him. The grocer on the corner started setting aside the good avocados when he saw Marco coming. The woman at the laundromat remembered he liked his shirts folded, not hung. The taqueria owner knew his order before he spoke. Small recognitions, but they added up to something that felt like belonging. He developed routines. Coffee at Rosa's cafe most mornings, where she'd updated him on neighborhood gossip and made sure he was eating properly. Lunch with Miguel from the agency, who was becoming a real friend. Afternoons working, losing himself in design problems that had clear solutions. Evenings walking the city, learning its rhythms, where the light fell at sunset, which streets came alive at night, where people gathered to play dominoes and drink beer. Elena started joining him for these walks. They'd meet after her shoots, wandering through neighborhoods while she pointed out details he would have missed. A mural painted by local kids, a community garden tended by volunteers, a small shrine to someone who'd died too young. She taught him to see the city the way she did, not as a collection of statistics and headlines, but as a living thing made of people who chose to care for each other. One evening, walking back from dinner at Dolores's restaurant, Elena asked, "Are you still looking for peace?" Marco thought about it. "I don't think I'm looking for anything anymore. I think I'm just here." "Good," she said. "That's when the city really starts to show you what it is." They walked in comfortable silence, and Marco realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd thought about Mexico City, about Gabriela, about the life he'd left behind. That person felt like someone else, someone who'd been searching for the wrong thing in the wrong way. Here, in Juarez, he wasn't searching anymore. He was simply living, working, walking, eating, talking, being present in each moment. The peace he'd been seeking hadn't come from solitude or escape. It had come from showing up, from letting people care, from becoming part of something larger than himself. His apartment accumulated evidence of a life being lived. Books half read on the coffee table, dishes in the sink, laundry hanging to dry, photographs Elena had given him taped to the walls. It wasn't much, but it was real. It was his. It was home, of belonging to something. "We do this most Fridays," Miguel said. "Different apartments, same people, more or less. You're always welcome." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just show up. That's all any of us do. We show up for each other." Marco started showing up. Friday nights became sacred, a rotating gathering at different apartments, always the same core group, sometimes with additions. They watched films at Sophia's place, her collection of DVDs spanning decades and continents. They cooked together at Lupita's apartment, her kitchen barely big enough for 3 people but somehow accommodating 7. They sat on Daniel's rooftop, drinking beer and watching the city lights spread toward the mountains. Elena was always there, and Marco found himself watching for her arrival, saving a seat beside him, their conversations extending long after everyone else had gone home. They talked about everything, her work, his past, their dreams, their fears. She told him about growing up in Chihuahua, about choosing journalism because she wanted to tell true stories. He told her about the emptiness he'd felt in Mexico City, the relief of leaving, the surprise of finding home in a place he'd never intended to stay. "Are you staying?" she asked one night, walking him home after a gathering. "I think so. I don't have a reason to leave." "Good," she said, and took his hand. It was that simple, that profound. 2 people choosing each other in a city that demanded you show up or disappear. Chapter 8. The Darkness. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Miguel's phone rang during lunch, and Marco watched his friend's face change. Confusion, then anger, then something like despair. "I have to go," Miguel said, standing abruptly. "My cousin. He's been arrested." "What happened?" "I don't know. Probably nothing. Probably everything." Miguel's hands shook as he gathered his things. "This is how it works here. They pick someone up, plant evidence, extract confessions. My cousin is a good kid. 22, works at a mechanic shop, sends money to his mother. But that doesn't matter." "What can I do?" "Nothing. There's nothing anyone can do. That's the point." Miguel left, and Marco sat alone with the remains of their lunch, understanding for the first time the darkness that lived beneath the city's surface. That evening, the friend group gathered at Daniel's apartment, not for their usual Friday celebration, but for something else: solidarity, witness, shared grief. Miguel explained what he knew. His cousin had been picked up near the mechanic shop, accused of being involved with a cartel. No evidence, no witnesses, just an accusation that would be enough to destroy his life. "They do this," Lupita said quietly. "Pick up young men, especially poor ones, especially brown ones. Quotas to fill, cases to close. Doesn't matter if they're guilty." "Can you get a lawyer?" Marco asked. "With what money?" Miguel's voice was hollow. "And even if we could, lawyers here are either corrupt or powerless. Sometimes both." Carlos spoke up, his voice careful. "This is why I'm terrified every day. One wrong move, one cop having a bad day, and I'm gone, deported or disappeared. Either way, gone." The room fell silent. Marco looked around at his friends, these good people who showed up for each other, who built community in the margins, who chose kindness despite everything. And he understood, finally, what Elena had been trying to show him from the beginning. Juarez wasn't paradise because it was safe or just or free from darkness. It was paradise because people chose to care for each other anyway. Because in the face of systems designed to crush them, they built small circles of love and showed up for each other with soup and solidarity and stubborn hope. "What do we do?" Marco asked. "We show up," Daniel said. "We visit him if they let us. We support Miguel. We keep living our lives and refusing to let the darkness win." "That's it?" Marco heard the frustration in his own voice. "We just keep going?" "What else is there?" Sophia asked gently. We can't fix the system. We can't make the corruption disappear. But we can choose how we live within it. We can choose each other. Elena took Marco's hand. This is what I was trying to tell you. Paradise isn't the absence of struggle. It's people choosing love in the middle of it. Choosing to show up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. They sat together late into the night, not celebrating, but simply being present. Miguel cried, and they let him. Carlos talked about his fear, and they listened. Lupita made coffee, and they drank it. Daniel told a story about one of his students, a kid who'd lost his father to violence but still showed up to class every day with a smile. Sophia read poetry aloud, words about resistance and hope and the stubborn refusal to surrender to despair. Marco understood something fundamental that night. He'd come to Juarez seeking peace, imagining it as the absence of pain, the escape from difficulty. But real peace wasn't that. Real peace was sitting in a room with people you loved, acknowledging the darkness and choosing to care for each other anyway. Miguel's cousin was released 3 days later, charges dropped as arbitrarily as they'd been filed. But the fear remained, the knowledge that it could happen again, to any of them, at any time. The city's darkness wasn't abstract. It was real, systemic, dangerous. And yet, people still gathered on Friday nights, still cooked for each other, argued about films, told stories, made space for whoever needed it, still showed up with soup when someone was sick, still celebrated small victories, still chose each other again and again. This is why kindness matters here, Miguel said, back at work the following week. Because it's harder. Because the darkness is real. Kindness in Juarez isn't naive. It's defiant. It's saying that love matters more than fear, that community matters more than safety, that we choose each other even when choosing each other is dangerous. Marco thought about the life he'd left in Mexico City, safe, comfortable, empty. And he thought about this life, uncertain, complicated, full. He knew which one he'd choose. He'd choose this every time. He'd choose showing up. He'd choose the people who'd chosen him. Chapter 9. Rosa's Stroke. The call came from Juan on a Sunday morning. Marco was making coffee when his phone rang, Juan's voice tight with worry. It's Rosa's husband, Roberto. He had a stroke. They're at the hospital. Rosa asked for you. Marco was out the door in minutes, still wearing yesterday's shirt, not bothering with coffee or breakfast. The hospital was across town, and the bus seemed to take forever, stopping at every corner while Marco's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. He found them in the emergency waiting room, Rosa sitting with her hands folded in her lap, face composed but eyes red, and surrounding her, Elena, Miguel, Danielle, Sophia, Lupita, Carlos, his entire friend group, already there, already showing up. Marco, Rosa said, standing when she saw him. She embraced him, and he felt her trembling. Thank you for coming. Of course. How is he? Stable. They're running tests. The doctor said the next 24 hours are critical. Her voice cracked slightly. He was driving. Thank God he pulled over first. If he'd been on the highway... Elena guided Rosa back to her seat, and Marco found a chair beside Miguel. "How long have you been here?" "Since 6. Juan called everyone." "Of course he did," Marco said, looking around at his friends. Of course they'd all come. This was what they did. They showed up. The hours passed slowly. Nurses came and went with updates. A doctor explained the stroke, the treatment, the prognosis. Rosa listened with the careful attention of someone trying to hold herself together through sheer will. Her daughter arrived from El Paso, embracing her mother and thanking everyone for being there. Around noon, Lupita disappeared and returned with food, tamales from her favorite vendor, still warm. "You need to eat," she told Rosa, who protested weakly before accepting a plate. They ate together in the waiting room, this strange family bound not by blood, but by choice. Daniel told gentle stories that made Rosa smile. Sophia held her hand. Carlos offered to call anyone she needed. Elena took photos, not for publication, but for memory. Miguel sat quietly, his presence itself a form of support. A nurse came out around 2. "Mrs. Hernandez, your husband is awake. You can see him now. Just family." Rosa stood, then turned to look at all of them. "You're all family," she said firmly. "All of you." The nurse looked uncertain, but Rosa's tone left no room for argument. "These are my people. They stay." They filed into the room in small groups. Roberto looked small in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him, but his eyes were clear. He smiled weakly when he saw Rosa, reached for her hand. "I'm okay," he whispered. "I'm okay." Rosa introduced Marco to the doctors and nurses as our friend. And something shifted in Marco's chest. Our friend. Not just Rosa's, but theirs. This community that had adopted him without asking. That had made space for him at their table. That had chosen him again and again. He thought about the man who'd arrived in Juarez 4 months ago, seeking peace and solitude. That man wouldn't have been in this hospital room. That man wouldn't have had people to call, wouldn't have known how to show up, wouldn't have understood that this, sitting in an uncomfortable chair in a hospital waiting room, surrounded by people who loved each other, this was paradise. Elena found him in the hallway later, staring out a window at the city spread below. "You okay?" "I was just thinking about why I came here, what I thought I was looking for." "And?" "I thought paradise was a place where nothing hurt, where I could be alone and safe and untouched by other people's pain." He turned to look at her. "But this is paradise. Right here. Showing up for Rosa. Being part of something that matters." Elena smiled. "You're learning? Rosa taught me. All of you taught me. Paradise isn't a place. It's people choosing each other. It's showing up with soup. It's sitting in hospital waiting rooms. It's making space at the table for whoever needs it. It's also this," Elena said, and kissed him. They stood in the hospital hallway, the city spreading out below them, surrounded by the sounds of life and death and everything in between. And Marco understood, finally and completely, what he'd been searching for all along. Not peace, not solitude, not escape. Belonging. Roberto recovered slowly, but steadily. The friend group took turns visiting, bringing food, sitting with Rosa, making sure she wasn't alone. Marco taught himself to make the ginger tea Rosa had brought him when he was sick, delivered it to her house in the evenings. It wasn't much, but it was what he could offer. It was showing up. Chapter 10. 1 year later. Marco woke on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after his arrival, and lay in bed watching light filter through the curtains of his apartment. His apartment. Not temporary housing, not a borrowed room, but his home. The space had accumulated a year of living, books stacked on every surface, plants thriving in the windows, photographs covering the walls. Elena's camera bag sat by the door, left there after she'd stayed over the night before. Coffee mugs from Rosa's cafe filled the kitchen cabinet. A blanket Lupita had knitted draped over the couch. Evidence of a life being lived, of belonging to something. He made coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the city waking up. A year ago, he'd arrived seeking paradise, imagining it as peace, solitude, escape from the noise of his old life. He'd been so certain that happiness meant being alone, untethered, free from the demands of other people. He'd been completely wrong. The year had transformed him in ways he couldn't have predicted. He'd found work that mattered, designing for local businesses that served their communities. He'd found friends who showed up for each other with stubborn consistency. He'd found Elena, who'd taught him to see the city's real story, who'd become someone he loved in a way that included both knowing and being known. He'd found Rosa, who'd shown him what it meant to care for someone simply because you could, who'd made space for him at her table, in her life, in her family, who'd taught him that paradise wasn't a destination but a practice, the daily choice to show up for the people you loved. The city no longer felt foreign. He knew its rhythms now, where the light fell at different times of day, which streets came alive at night, where people gathered to share food and stories. He knew the vendors by name, the bus routes by heart, the shortcuts through neighborhoods that tourists never saw. He'd stopped thinking about leaving. Somewhere in the past year, Juarez had stopped being a temporary refuge and become home. Not because it was perfect. The darkness Miguel had warned him about was real, the corruption and violence and systemic injustice that marked life at the border. But because he'd found people who chose to care for each other anyway, who built community in the margins, who showed up with soup and solidarity and stubborn hope. His phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "Don't forget dinner tonight, 7 p.m. No excuses." He smiled. She'd been planning this for weeks, a celebration of his 1-year anniversary in Juarez. He'd tried to tell her it wasn't necessary, but Rosa didn't accept that kind of protest. "You found us," she'd said. "That's worth celebrating." Marco spent the day working, then walked to Elena's apartment in the late afternoon. She was editing photos, but looked up when he arrived, smiling in the way that still made his chest tighten. "Ready for your party?" she asked. "It's not a party, it's just dinner. With Rosa, it's definitely a party." She saved her work and stood, stretching. "You know everyone's coming, right? The whole group." "I figured." They walked to Rosa's house together, hand in hand, through streets that had become familiar. The city was settling into evening, the amber light Marco had first seen a year ago painting everything soft and golden. Rosa's house was small but generous, the kind of place that expanded to hold whoever needed holding. They could hear voices and laughter before they reached the door. "Here we go," Elena said, squeezing his hand. Marco took a breath and knocked. Chapter 11. The Celebration. Rosa opened the door with flour on her hands and joy on her face. "There you are. Come in, come in. Everyone's already here." The house was full. Miguel and Daniel arguing about something in the living room. Sofia and Lupita in the kitchen helping Rosa cook. Carlos setting the table. Juan pouring drinks. Roberto, recovered and moving slowly but steadily, sat in his favorite chair, directing traffic with gentle authority. "Marco," Lupita called from the kitchen. "Come taste this and tell me if it needs more salt." He was pulled into the warmth of it, the chaos of people who loved each other making space and noise and food. Elena disappeared to help Sofia with something, and Marco found himself in the kitchen with Rosa, who handed him a spoon and a pot of pozole. "Perfect," he said after tasting. "It's perfect." "Like you'd tell me if it wasn't." She smiled and touched his cheek. 1 year. Can you believe it?" "Honestly? No. It feels like I've been here forever, and also like I just arrived." "That's how you know you're home. Time stops making sense." They gathered around Rosa's table, which had been extended with a folding table to accommodate everyone. The food came in waves: pozole, tamales, rice, beans, fresh tortillas, 3 kinds of salsa, flan for dessert. Rosa had cooked for days, refusing all offers of help, insisting this was her gift. "A toast," Miguel said, raising his glass. "To Marco, who came here looking for peace and found a family instead." "To Marco," everyone echoed. "Wait," Rosa said. "I want to say something." She stood, glass in hand, looking at Marco with eyes that held a year of accumulated affection. "When I met you at the bus station, you looked so lost, like you were searching for something you couldn't name. And I thought, this one needs people. This one needs to know he's not alone." Marco felt his throat tighten. "And look at you now," Rosa continued. "You have work that matters. You have friends who love you. You have Elena, who's too good for you, but loves you anyway." Laughter around the table. "You have a home. You have us. And we have you. That's what I want to celebrate. Not that you've been here a year, but that you let us love you, that you showed up, that you stayed." "To showing up," Daniel said. "To staying," Sofia added. They drank, and then everyone was talking at once, the conversation flowing in multiple directions. Carlos told a story about his visa finally being renewed. Lupita announced she was teaching a cooking class at the community center. Daniel invited Marco to teach design at his school on weekends. "The kids would love it, and you're good with people." Elena leaned close to Marco. "You okay?" "More than okay." He looked around the table, at these people who'd chosen him, who'd made space for him, who'd taught him what paradise really meant. "I was just thinking about what I'd tell myself a year ago. If I could go back to that bus station." "What would you say?" "That peace isn't what you think it is. That paradise isn't a place you escape to. It's people you choose and who choose you back. that the best thing you can do is show up and let yourself be loved. That's pretty good advice. I had good teachers. The evening stretched long the way the best evenings do. They ate until they couldn't eat anymore, then somehow found room for flan. They told stories, Miguel recounting the time Marco had gotten lost trying to find the market, Elena sharing photos from her latest project, Rosa talking about the neighborhood she'd lived in for 40 years and the people who made it home. Around 10, Roberto stood carefully and raised his glass again. I want to say something too. When I had my stroke, I was scared. Not of dying, but of leaving Rosa alone. And then I woke up in that hospital room and saw all of you there, all of you. And I thought, she's not alone. She'll never be alone, because we have this. He gestured around the table. We have each other. We have each other, Rosa repeated softly. Marco felt Elena's hand find his under the table. He looked around at his friends, his family, and understood completely what Rosa had been trying to teach him from the beginning. Paradise wasn't a destination. It wasn't peace or solitude or escape. Paradise was this: a table full of people who showed up for each other, who brought soup when you were sick, who sat in hospital waiting rooms, who celebrated your arrivals and mourned your losses, who made space at the table and assumed the best, and chose love over fear again and again. Paradise was people deciding that caring for each other mattered more than safety, more than comfort, more than the darkness that surrounded them. Paradise was the stubborn, defiant choice to build community in the margins, to show up with soup and solidarity, to make home out of whatever materials were available. Paradise was Ciudad Juárez, not because it was perfect, but because it was full of people who chose each other anyway. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked quietly. Marco smiled. That I came here looking for the wrong thing, and found exactly what I needed, which is this, all of this, you, them, home. The conversation flowed around them, laughter and argument and the comfortable noise of people who knew each other well. Outside, the city continued its rhythms. The same city Marco had arrived in a year ago, seeking paradise. He'd found it, but not where he'd expected. He'd found it in Rosa's generosity, in Elena's fierce love, in Miguel's friendship, in the way Lupita cooked for everyone, in Daniel's quiet wisdom, in Sophia's bookstore, in Carlos's resilience, in Juan's steady presence, in Roberto's recovery. He'd found it in showing up, in being shown up for, in the daily choice to care and be cared for, to make space and occupy space, to belong and let others belong. He'd found paradise in people. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Rosa pulled Marco aside. "You know you're stuck with us now, right? You can't leave. We won't let you." "I'm not going anywhere," Marco said. "This is home." "Good." She hugged him tightly. "Because we love you, mijo. And love means you're ours now." Marco walked home with Elena through streets he knew by heart, under stars that seemed brighter than they had a year ago. The city spread around them, imperfect, complicated, beautiful, home. "Happy anniversary," Elena said. "Happy anniversary." They walked in comfortable silence, and Marco thought about the man who'd arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 suitcases and a hollow heart. That man had been seeking peace in all the wrong places, imagining paradise as escape. This man, the one walking through Juarez with Elena's hand in his, the one who had friends who loved him and work that mattered, and a home that felt real, this man knew better. Paradise wasn't a place. It was people. It was showing up. It was the daily choice to care and be cared for, to build community in the margins, to make space at the table for whoever needed it. Paradise was here, had been here all along, waiting for him to stop running and start belonging. El Paraíso no ve mal alguno. En Dios confiamos. Paradise sees no evil. In God we trust. But Marco had learned a different truth. Paradise sees all the evil, all the darkness, all the struggle, and chooses love anyway. Chooses to show up with soup. Chooses to make space at the table. Chooses people again and again, despite everything. That was the real paradise. Not the absence of darkness, but the presence of people who refused to let darkness win. And Marco had found it, here in Ciudad Juárez, in the last place he'd expected to find home. The end. You have been listening to Ciudad Juárez, El Paraíso no ve mal alguno. En Dios Confiamos, written by Jason Stewart, and read for you by Benjamin.